Hi everyone. I'm Anna. I work in the training team at EMBL EBI. You heard a little bit from the training team already this morning, but I'm going to be talking about the use and a couple of examples of games in bioinformatics training. Just before I kind of get into the game side of things, I just wanted to do a brief introduction around EMBL EBI training. And so there's a few different types of training that we do offer. In terms of format, some of it's very similar to what you've just heard previously. So some short courses tend to be week-long in person on our campus, but we also run virtual courses as well. And so that's the kind of the live side of things. Alongside that, we run an open webinar program. And then on the on-demand side of things, so there's the open training that's available for everyone to access anytime they like. We have self-paced short courses, recordings from webinars, and that kind of, as well as materials from courses. In terms of topics, this can range very much from introducing concepts in bioinformatics, analyzing different types of data, through to getting started in using EMBL EBI resources. So I mentioned about a few different types of formats there, but today I'm going to be focusing on two types, and particularly the use of games in these two types. So firstly, I'll talk a bit about live in-person training, games at that. And then secondly, I'll move on to some examples of games in e-learning. So firstly, of the in-person courses. So I wanted to think a bit about why we actually use games, or thinking about using games for in-person training. So a lot of our courses are quite intense. There are a lot of time spent listening to talks, analysing data, time spent on a computer. But there's scope for a bit more of introductory sessions, people working together, getting to know each other towards the beginning of courses. And in that time, games can be a great option in sort of helping people get into the materials and helping them work together and form a nice group. There's also quite a bit around making the learning experience just a bit more fun, a bit more memorable. And as I'm going to get onto a bit later on, the possibility or the opportunity for slightly more structured activities that are available for people during breaks. So one game element that we've been doing for a number of years now is what we call a treasure hunt around the EMBL EBI data resources. So the idea behind this is that people are given challenges to do, and once they've completed the challenge, they come up to the trainer, they find out if they're right. If they are, they get a new challenge. If not, they get a bit of help if they need it. And this is very much made more of a game-like session by the fact that if participants want to, they're encouraged to sort of compete and get through things quickly, with the expectation that at the end of the session they can go back and take a look in a bit more detail at the resources that are relevant to them. So this is very much about learning about EBI resources and just sort of learning about the breadth of the data that's openly available. But this is very much during a formal training session. This has always gone down well, but we were kind of thinking, was there something that we could do where this kind of session doesn't necessarily fit in a course, but we still want to make sure that people are getting awareness of the different resources available. And so we started to think, is there something that we could do that's a bit more informal, maybe outside of a proper session? So that kind of led on to this idea of the EMBL EBI data resources card game. And we very much started from the same sort of learning objectives about getting to know the range of EBI resources, with an addition here to sort of make things a bit more interesting, thinking about data management issues as well. But the use is the big difference here. This is thinking about it more informally. So once kind of had this very, very basic idea, as part of the EOSC Life project, so that's the European Open Science Cloud, we were able to attend two-day workshops around the gamification of training, creating games in training. And the development of this card game very much happened during these two workshops and sort of in the intervening period. So the workshop started off, the first workshop started off where we were very much learning about different types of games, different types of mechanisms used in games, so how they work, the kind of subjects that different games cover. And during that workshop, we started off discussing the kind of games that we could use to sort of work with our learning outcomes that different people had. And during that workshop, I was able to create some very basic prototype cards. But this is very much based on a game that I thought, oh, this game kind of works. We tried it out during the workshop. I'd like to do something a bit similar to this, and it sort of developed from there. So then during the time between the two workshops, I took what I'd put together from the first one, made some modifications, developed it a bit further so that I had a playable prototype. And this wasn't in any way a game that I would take and put in front of participants, but it was something that I could then take to the second workshop, where it was all about iterating on design. So working as a group who were working on different games to work together to identify ways in which we could improve and give each other feedback. This was quite an iterative process because it took a lot of time, a lot of playing of the same game a number of times, so that we could kind of develop and move forward. And that was the end of the second workshop as part of EOSC Life, but it very much wasn't the end of the development process of this game. So you might be getting the idea this is quite a long process, and it was, and I'll kind of come back to that in a bit. But following on the development, so after the workshops, I had a game. It was playable, but it still needed a lot of testing and a lot of very kind people who were happy to do that with me. So I started off with some colleagues testing it, and then moved on to putting it in front of participants during course lunch breaks and seeing how they played it and sort of observing them. And this testing kind of impacted quite a lot, and including, the content that was actually shown on the cards, the number of cards in the deck, the rules, how we talked about it to people, and a lot of things were still sort of fine-tuned at that stage after that testing. At that point, I just wanted to highlight some of the design elements that were chosen and why we actually chose them. So I've been talking about a card game. I chose, here it is. The reason I went with a card game is because this was printed on a normal printer, and it's thin card, but it's playable, which meant that it was easy to prototype, easy to replicate. And if I gave copies to anyone, it didn't really matter because I could just create a new one. So that was good to do. But also means that you can add and sort of take away cards as necessary. So if a new resource comes out, we can add it to the deck. Simple rules were really key, simpler than I thought initially. After trying these things out, it needed to get even more and more simple as I kind of carried on with the testing. The player interaction was also essential because this is the bit that made it fun. The people needed to be able to sort of make things better and worse for other people, to take their cards, to sort of show them that they were interacting and they were doing something together. We also used a game board. I have here, and it's a bit of a tatty piece of paper because it's come across the Atlantic with me. But the main reason for using a game board, and it's quite simple for something that is called a game board. It's not like a big Monopoly board or anything, but it helps focus a group, and they have something that they can all kind of look at together. It also has the rules on, and it kind of makes things a bit simpler. In terms of card design, as the final point there, it was just about keeping things simple and clean, but making everything recognizable for people as they kind of got into using the game. So this in the top left-hand corner, well, most of the slide, is the game board that I just held up. The idea behind this game is that we're all working on a project AIM, and that goes in the middle. And within that, they have a number of different EBI resources that they have to try and collect to complete the project AIM. The difficulty being the AIM changes. Other people can change it. So if you see your neighbors getting ahead of you, you can change what we're all working towards. There's also event cards, which are all about data management, and error cards where everything suddenly goes wrong. In terms of challenges through this development process, as I think you probably gathered, it was quite a time-consuming process, and it was difficult to get the details right, but it took some time. It also required quite a lot of testing. And not everyone's into games, and that's fine, because we're offering it as optional. it's kind of open for people to do. But there was also quite a few opportunities that kind of came out of it, both for me. I really enjoyed making it. Yeah, it took time, but it was fun, so it kind of works too. And lots of people and participants of courses were really keen to try it and get involved. And we received some really nice feedback about it. I particularly like the one where someone said they'd like to play it with their family. I'm not sure their family would agree, but okay. So that was the in-person side of things. And I really just want to quickly move across to e-learning as the last kind of section of the presentation. So in terms of why we wanted to use games for sort of online self-paced learning, a lot of these reasons are very much the same as for in-person courses. It's all about kind of engaging learners and helping them through some of the more theoretical concepts, such as the data management ones I was mentioning before, and making things more enjoyable and fun. But for e-learning, I think there's quite a bit around trying to keep people engaged throughout their self-paced courses. It's kind of their own effort they're putting in and keeping them interested in their sort of siloed learning environment. It's also quite useful for us to be able to monitor people's learning. So if they're completing a little game, we can see how they're doing. We can see whether they're getting the concepts that we're trying to put across. There's a few examples here of what I actually mean by games and e-learning. So, for example, we have a crossword. It's pretty straightforward in terms of a game, but people seem keen to engage in that, and very simple drag and drop elements as well. In terms of the development process, it was quite similar to the in-person game process, but much simpler and quicker. So again, starting from the learning outcome and working out what kind of elements would actually, interactive elements would work. And then about getting feedback, reviewing how people use it, and sort of iterating where necessary on that process. I wanted to just give a couple of examples of some games that we've kind of put within e-learning courses. The first is actually the online version of that treasure hunt that I mentioned at the start. So this is again all about discovering different EBI resources, but instead of running up to the front to the trainer to ask if they're right, they can just use this little multiple choice question, and there's also the ability to get hints if they need a bit of help. And then the other one I wanted to show was this actually really simple word search, but it's instead of being about people testing themselves or seeing how they're doing, it's about getting a concept across. So this is all about controlled vocabularies and why we need them, and just by sort of saying, look, find all the words that kind of are similar to this word, people use a lot that mean basically the same thing. Even if they don't do the word search, they can really simply get the concept that we're trying to put across. For creating these different interactive elements, we use something called H5P, which is a plugin that can be used for different learning management systems. So we use WordPress, but it's in lots of different platforms like Moodle and so on. The reason I wanted to show something at this point as well is because I wanted to show how simple some of these things are. So this screenshot, you can see the last line there, it's got the word list. So this was all that I needed to create that word search. So really it's just I copied and pasted a list of words and it was ready to go. I also had a look at how people were actually using these games and whether including them was affecting the engagement time. So on average, people tend to spend around 2 minutes on each page within an online tutorial that they access. A lot of these pages are quite simple, not necessarily a huge amount of content because they're part of bigger courses, but 2 minutes is about the average. For the two examples that I just showed, the averages are significantly higher. So for that, the challenges that I showed for the treasure hunt, each challenge people are spending around 3.5 minutes on. And for that controlled vocabularies page, people are spending around 4 minutes on that. So they are engaging more with these than your average page. I also had a look at a small interactive element that I added in. It was around phylogenies. And before I changed it into an interactive element, it was just a picture of a tree. And then that was adapted to become an interactive drag and drop element. Before, when it was just an image, on average, people were spending 43 seconds on it. After it was changed to that interactive drag and drop image, we saw an increase to 56 seconds. It's not a huge increase. It's not a complex interactive element, but it was interesting to see that there was a difference at that point. And in terms of the feedback we receive, it's really very positive about the kind of interactive content people are trying to access. And in Indy, we ask about what could be improved, and often what we see is, can we have more of that, please? So just to quickly summarize, for both the in-person and the e-learning, we're very much looking at, as you do for any kind of learning activity, starting with the learning outcomes and seeing what you're kind of doing there, but very much following on by thinking about the mechanics of the game, the design and the testing, and that longer process. For trainers, I talked about the long process, but as I said, it's also an opportunity for creativity and some fun. And for the e-learning side, it really does help us determine whether the learners are learning. For the learners, I think there are a lot of opportunities here. That kind of alternative learning experience, the bit of fun that maybe breaks up a course that it can be quite intensive, and also supporting the learning of concepts that might be a little bit more difficult and challenging and theoretical. And of course, to provide evidence that they are actually learning to themselves. Okay, so I think that is where I wanted to finish and say thank you, but also to say if anyone wants to come and check out the game later on, I'll be around at the break and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. Any questions? We have one already there for this fun gaming learning.
Thanks so much. I am really interested in this, but I have two questions. One is about learning curve, specifically for the online gaming kind of tools. I've had freshman biologist students learning computational bio kind of techniques, and sometimes with the drag and drop stuff or just like phylogenies and things like that, where it's a learning curve even just to use the user interface for the game. How has your feedback been on that? Or is the tool that you're using, or the site that you're using to build the games, is it already take into account like helping teach people how to use the interface? And then also about longevity, like how long do these stay up? Is it you have to maintain them, or like what is the basically just general longevity question?
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
So on the first question about ease of use, so H5P is very easy to use generally in terms of, I mean, both the sort of development I showed, but also the learner interaction with it. Everything is very consistent. So even when it's different types of element, it's the same sort of buttons, the same way things move across. So the only thing we've ever really done is add one sentence above the activities to say, do this thing. And we've never seen anyone have any problem with that. So it's pretty straightforward. In terms of the longevity, we have a yearly review cycle for all our e-learning. And at that point, we check to make sure that that includes the interactive elements. And actually, part of that cycle, we try and add more. So we're on a very continual progression of adding more interactivity to it as well. But yeah, it very much comes into our yearly cycle.
Thank you very much. Don't know if we have another question here.
Hi, thank you. It was a very interesting presentation. I really like the idea of incorporating like games to indeed spice up your lecture and make it more interesting. My question was, did you mostly intend this to be a way of getting people excited and breaking up like, maybe a longer lecture? Or did you also really look at, did it actually improve their learning? Did you evaluate in some way if they actually learned from these games, or they more saw it as a welcome break that then helped them learn better in the actual content of the course?
Yeah, so the card game has been used only as a sort of optional activity in breaks, so in lunch break, for example, and we haven't monitored it specifically because it's not been a required part of the course. But what we have done is tried to have conversations with people and observe what they're doing and hear about the conversations they've been having. And what we did see is they were using it as both an opportunity to go, oh, this is the resource I've been looking for, right? And making notes and going away with it, but also as a way of talking about those data management issues that can be difficult to talk about when they're your own issues. And so they've kind of had a way of talking about them and pointing at them without thinking, I'm doing something wrong, or it can be awkward to talk about. So nothing in a structured way, but very much through informal conversations. We've been monitoring that.
We have a question here from Kath.
I think it's more an addition to the conversation, really, as well as benefiting the trainers and the trainees. Playing the card game with a group of collaborators one evening in the middle of a consortium meeting, I realised that it also supports the developers of the resources and the EBI services in general, because seeing the comments that they were making about the data resources was absolutely fascinating. For example, I discovered that nobody wanted the ontologies card, which shocked me to the core. But yeah. But so we as an organisation learned a lot as well. And then, I mean, the other thing I would like to point out is that with the little interactive games that Anna's placed into our e-learning. Many of them are around the conceptual content rather than the more kind of skills around using a particular data resource. So they tend not to go out of date. So once you've developed the thing, it does tend to have quite a long shelf life, which is helpful, I think.
That's a good point.
I just wanted to echo the what you were saying about HYP and use for the online kind of interactive activities. It's just amazing. We are also using it a lot. But my question was whether the cards, I really loved the game you're explaining for the in-person playing cards, were more of a kind of a wider or just referring to the specific course, to the specific resources. But Kat,
it's very much a range. I think every resource from the EBI is represented, it should be, and there's a little bit of information about each resource on the card, so it's enough to give people a flavour about what it's about, so then they can go away and think, oh, that's for me, and I'll go and have a look at it. I was just going to add on to the H5P front. So on h5p.org, there's some examples of how some different elements play, and you can try them out, and it's quite a nice way of working out whether they would work for you.
Thank you so much.